Hello and welcome to Why Shy Why for this week, guys. Appreciate you spending some time with me. Profits. Profits are all that we as startup founders or business managers want, right? Okay, maybe not, but it's very important. What we tend to do though is keep looking at revenue, revenue this, revenue that. We're just doing revenue generation activity. 80% of our time tends to go towards that. And we keep forgetting the other part of activities that we should be looking at least 50% of our time should be looking at cost reduction strategies, right? And we forget to do that. Revenue's the sexy one. Revenue's the one that, you know, allows us to do marketing and advertising and branding and product development, all the cool things that happen in an organization is revenue generating. But what about the boring things that happen in an organization? Those things are called costs. Those things can also be um, itemized. They can be sexy in a sense, in an accountant sort of way. They can be fixed. They can be reduced. They can be efficient. And that's kind of where my brain comes into play a little bit. I guess I was just made for looking at costs and breaking them down. But if I were to walk in to an organization and look at a big cost, the first thing I would try to do is break it down. The analogy with eating an elephant or whatever it is, I don't quite get it, but I think you guys are on the same page in that you take big costs, you slice them into small costs, and then if you create problem definitions out of those little costs, and then you solve, right? Kind of seems pretty simple, but incredibly hard. Um, maybe the best way to explain this would be through an example rather than the maths of it all. So we have a current client, been around for a little while, that is a healthcare organization. They've been around for about 20 years, so they're doing quite well for themselves. But walked into this organization and there was paper everywhere. There were paper charts for patients. There was doctors scribbling on pads, and it was just it was the it, it was me going into a clinic in 1995, right? And wow, did I feel excited? Not because I'm into low tech everything, but I was really excited by the impact that we could have, right, in that organization. And it was healthcare, and I love healthcare, and so it kind of really gelled in with the way that we work. That excitement disappeared very quickly, purely because I had this inkling that change would be very hard in this organization. There was a very stable culture. The culture was a little bit less than modern, let's put it that way. There was slight resistance to change, and there was some intimidation of technology, right? And so you put those things together. And guys, I wasn't able to see that straight away, but after talking to a few people, looking at the artifacts around the offices, it became painfully obvious. That being said, the stability of a culture is really important to the business performance, right? And that's one thing I would not want to change at all, be it positive or negative, right? I don't want it to be a disruptive cultural change because people are involved, and that's the last thing you need. So what I saw was huge, right? The problem definition, the costs in this organization that this organization was carrying were huge. But what I had to do was find one small sliver cost that I could pick on that wouldn't hurt the culture too much, that would get people on side and would have a big win. I found one. I found one within 4 minutes of sitting in the waiting room. I was sitting there in the waiting room, in the patient waiting room, before I was called into the office. And I noticed patients would walk in, they would go to this piece of paper, sorry, and they would log in their time that they arrived, and then they would log out. They would be logged out by the doctor when they collected them. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. The idea behind it's really cool. They can do waiting time analysis. They can start looking at their service provisioning based on that analysis and start making things a little bit slicker. Idea is sound. Love it. Really, really into it. However, the methodology, the execution of the idea, I think could have been done better. And that's what I started picking on. So really, really simple solution, guys. We had a tablet put in place instead of the chart, the scribble log. The tablet had some of our software running on it. It was really simple. You go in, you register, you hit a big green button to register. You put in your username, sorry, your not username, your URN number, your identifier, and it registers you. You sit down, right? No waiting around, not waiting in line for someone to type stuff in. It's literally a 7-second process, right? Doctor comes in, taps on your URN, hits logged in, walks out. Doctors are incredibly expensive resources. You don't want to be wasting their time with writing stuff. Yeah. And so we put in this technology, really simple as you can tell, and it made an incredibly small impact on the cost, right? Clearly, because all we're talking about here is patient times and doctor time waiting, right? What you would call time and motion studies were decreased. So now the doctors are spending less time collecting patients, everyone's happy, the logging is a lot more comprehensive. The analysis of this logging is done online, which is even much more easier. No one has to sort of type all the stuff into Excel and then analyze. And we can do it in real time also. So there's all these little wins that are coming in place because of the technology. But those are literally really little wins. The big cost win for me was the huge cultural change, right? One small step for technology, one huge step for the people in this organization. And yes, I did come up with that earlier, and yes, I do like that line. But what I'm trying to say is that the cultural change there was so profound, people started to realize how technology could be a benefit rather than a hindrance. I started to see champions pop up and go, why don't we change this into something that's a bit more techy? Why don't we change that to make it a little bit more slick? Let's get the friction out of this particular process. People weren't talking like that before I walked in, right? They started talking after they saw a very small problem fixed by a very small solution that had a very small impact. Small is okay, guys. Small is the start of something big, okay? So be okay with fixing something small. Keep your eyes on and your mind on your costs just as much as your revenue. And I guarantee you at the end of the day, you'll have a far more balanced ledger, number one, not such a big deal, but also a culture that makes sure that when you're absent as a founder, that costs are still kept in check. All right, guys, have a good week. See you next week.